Lewis Hamilton confirms a multi-million-dollar buyout clause in his Ferrari contract after the Singapore Grand Prix. Want to know what really happened behind the scenes? Stay until the end and I'll reveal all the details. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. The Formula One world has erupted into absolute pandemonium, and for once, it has nothing to do with lap times, tire choices, or controversial safety cars. What's shaking the paddock right now is something far deeper, far more seismic, something that cuts directly into the fragile political heart of Ferrari itself. Lewis Hamilton has just confirmed, publicly and unapologetically, that the rumors about his secret multi-million-dollar buyout clause in his Ferrari contract are completely true. Not a rumor. Not speculation. A real, legally binding clause of such enormous magnitude that it has shattered the conventional balance of power between driver and team, between management and legend. This isn't just another contractual technicality buried beneath layers of legal jargon. This is a bomb hidden in plain sight, a weapon of pure leverage crafted for one man and one man alone. The clause, reportedly worth over $45 million, functions less like a buyout and more like an insurance policy against betrayal, a nuclear-level safeguard embedded deep in the heart of Hamilton's deal, designed to ensure that he, not Ferrari, holds the ultimate power. It's a clause so aggressive, so audacious, that it effectively gives him the ability to walk away from Maranello at any moment, cash in full, and leave Ferrari both humiliated and financially wounded if he believes he's been wronged. Its discovery has sent tremors across the sport, forcing executives, journalists, and rival team principals to rethink what driver empowerment really looks like in the post-hybrid era. And the way it was confirmed, that's what turned the paddock into a frenzy. Hamilton didn't mention it in passing, nor did it leak through anonymous insiders. He confirmed it himself, intentionally, surgically, and with unmistakable precision. During a press conference in Singapore, with the cameras rolling and the world watching, Hamilton sat beside Charles Leclerc and Frédéric Vasseur, and when a journalist asked about contractual misunderstandings, he leaned forward, smiled faintly, and said, "Let's just say I'm protected." The silence in the room was deafening. The subtext was unmistakable. He wasn't just hinting. He was firing a warning shot through the center of Maranello's political machinery. Every executive, every engineer, every strategist in red understood the message instantly. If they dared to cross him, he would walk away, and he would get paid to do it. According to multiple sources with direct knowledge of the contract, the origin of this clause dates back to late 2023, when negotiations between Hamilton's camp and Ferrari reached their most delicate and dangerous stage. The talks were intense, almost theatrical, late-night meetings in London hotels, encrypted calls between lawyers in Maranello and Hamilton's representatives, constant pressure from both sides. Ferrari was desperate to secure him. Hamilton was determined to do it on his terms. And at the center of the entire discussion was a single phrase that Hamilton reportedly repeated again and again: integrity protection. He didn't just want performance guarantees, he wanted armor, legal, financial, and moral armor. After witnessing the chaos and manipulation that had plagued Ferrari for years, from internal rivalries to political sabotage and inconsistent strategy calls, Hamilton refused to join unless he had full control over his fate. He demanded a clause that would allow him to terminate his contract instantly if he could prove even the smallest trace of bias, sabotage, or tampering with his car's telemetry. That meant if Ferrari ever favored Leclerc in strategy, if data was intentionally withheld, or if Hamilton suspected internal interference with his setups or simulations, he could trigger the clause and walk away with complete financial compensation, including all salary, performance bonuses, and image rights payouts. The amount, $45 million, wasn't random. It was specifically chosen to sting, to serve as a deterrent, to ensure that Ferrari would think twice before letting the internal politics that had destroyed past drivers consume another champion. Effectively, it's a fine written by a driver, imposed upon his own team, an unprecedented move in Formula One's modern history. Insiders close to the negotiations say that the clause nearly killed the deal. Ferrari's board, especially Chairman John Elkann, was initially furious when Hamilton's lawyers presented the demand. Elkann reportedly called it an insult, a direct challenge to Ferrari's authority, something that no driver, not Schumacher, not Alonso, not Vettel, had ever dared to request. But Hamilton wasn't bluffing. He made it clear that without that clause, there would be no signature, no press conference, no red overalls. For him, it wasn't about ego, it was about control. After nearly 2 decades in Formula One, he had seen how quickly loyalty could evaporate the moment politics entered the garage. Behind the scenes, negotiations turned tense. Legal teams debated language for days. What counted as sabotage, how bias would be defined, what evidence would trigger the clause. Ferrari's lawyers fought to limit its scope, to include arbitration procedures and confidentiality restrictions, but Hamilton's representatives refused to compromise. They wanted the trigger to be instantaneous, with zero delay and no internal appeal process. Hamilton wanted the right to judge fairness for himself. And then, unexpectedly, a familiar name entered the picture: Toto Wolff. Sources now suggest that Wolff, still deeply connected to Hamilton through years of shared dominance at Mercedes, quietly advised him throughout the negotiations. He knew Ferrari's desperation. He knew their politics. And he knew exactly how far they would go to secure the sport's most marketable superstar. According to whispers from the financial side of the paddock, Wolff even made discreet contact with Elkann, warning him that Hamilton would walk if Ferrari refused to meet his demands. The irony was staggering. The man who had built Mercedes' empire was indirectly shaping Ferrari's downfall. Ferrari's leadership was trapped. On one hand, they feared the humiliation of being manipulated by their new superstar. On the other, they feared the public embarrassment of losing Hamilton before he'd even worn red. The Tifosi were already dreaming of redemption, of the great British champion delivering a title in scarlet. Walking away at that stage would have been catastrophic. And so, reluctantly, Ferrari agreed. When the signatures were finally exchanged in December 2023, the mood inside Maranello was bittersweet. Hamilton's team celebrated quietly. Ferrari's executives tried to convince themselves that the clause was a small price to pay for the biggest signing in modern Formula One history. They believed the political turbulence of the past could be contained, that Hamilton's leadership would unite the factory, that everything would fall into place once the engines roared. But it didn't. The very clause they had agreed to in desperation became the sword hanging over their heads. Every disagreement, every strategic decision, every internal whisper now carried a shadow of legal consequence. Ferrari engineers began second-guessing themselves. Team meetings became tight-lipped, with lawyers quietly sitting in corners. Strategy calls went through multiple layers of review, terrified of triggering an accusation of bias. The fear of Hamilton's nuclear button transformed the team from a racing family into a cautious corporation walking on eggshells. And when Hamilton finally invoked that clause, or rather when he confirmed its existence publicly, it wasn't out of anger, it was out of clarity. It was a declaration of independence. He was reminding Ferrari and the world that he was not just another driver under contract. He was an institution, a force of nature, a brand, and a strategist who knew his worth down to the decimal. He had turned Ferrari's desperation into his greatest weapon. Now, as the paddock continues to reel, one truth has become undeniable. This clause has rewritten the rules of Formula One contracts forever. No driver will ever negotiate the same way again. Hamilton didn't just protect himself. He changed the landscape of power in the sport. And Ferrari, in their hunger to reclaim glory, may have unknowingly handed the keys of their kingdom to the very man who was always destined to walk away with them. That small but explosive detail altered the entire landscape of Formula One's power dynamic. It wasn't merely a contractual footnote, it was the seed of a potential earthquake. When Toto Wolff later admitted that he had remained close to Lewis Hamilton even after his departure, it confirmed what many inside the paddock had long suspected: the connection between the two men had never broken. It had simply evolved into something more discreet, more strategic, more personal. Their relationship wasn't just professional. It was forged in the crucible of shared triumphs, late-night debriefs, and the kind of mutual respect that comes only from conquering the impossible together. For 8 years, they had built empires side by side, and when Hamilton left for Ferrari, Wolff didn't see it as betrayal. He saw it as a temporary divergence, a detour in a story he knew wasn't finished. When Ferrari's offer arrived, shiny, emotional, wrapped in promises of glory and heritage, Wolff didn't stand in the way. He let Hamilton take it. But in his typically calculated fashion, he made sure his friend wasn't stepping into a trap. That parachute Wolff helped design into Hamilton's contract was, in truth, more like an ejector seat, a secret escape route hidden within the fine print. It allowed Hamilton, should the Italian dream turn sour, to trigger a clean, uncontestable exit. The poetic irony was impossible to miss. The man Ferrari thought they had lured away had been equipped by his old boss with a very mechanism that could bring him straight back. Now that mechanism, that quiet clause buried deep in legal phrasing, was no longer theoretical. The timing of Hamilton's public revelation was surgical. It came just days after the Singapore Grand Prix, when the whispers started. Engineers inside Ferrari's camp began noticing irregularities in the data logs. Telemetry from Hamilton's car showed unexplained power deficits compared to Leclerc's, especially during crucial phases of qualifying. One senior engineer reportedly said that the numbers didn't add up, that there were inconsistencies no internal explanation could reasonably justify. At first, the discrepancies were dismissed as normal variations, but the tone inside the garage shifted when Hamilton's own analysts began raising questions. Then came the move that detonated like a thunderclap across the paddock. Hamilton's management hired external, independent data auditors to review Ferrari's telemetry. It was a bombshell decision, something virtually unheard of in Formula One, a public declaration that the driver no longer trusted the team's internal integrity. It wasn't just a technical disagreement, it was a challenge to Maranello's very credibility. To bring in outsiders to examine Ferrari's sacred data systems was an act that shook the political foundations of the team. The paddock reacted with stunned silence. Rival engineers called it a declaration of war. What those auditors found remains tightly under wraps, but what became clear almost immediately was that Hamilton was invoking the most powerful clause in his contract, one so carefully designed that even Ferrari's legal team now viewed it as a ticking time bomb. The clause contained 3 distinct triggers, each requiring documented evidence and formal notification. The first was straightforward: any provable case of unequal technical treatment or the allocation of superior parts to another driver would allow Hamilton to terminate his deal instantly. The second was more psychological: interference in race strategy or communications, meaning that if the team manipulated pit calls or tire choices to favor Leclerc, Hamilton had the right to walk away on the spot. But it was the third trigger that terrified Ferrari's executives the most: deliberate falsification or manipulation of race data. If proven even partially, the clause wouldn't just free Hamilton, it would obligate Ferrari to pay his full contract value, a sum rumored to exceed €80 million. For many, this wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. Ferrari's internal politics were legendary, a complex, emotional ecosystem where power struggles often mattered more than performance. Alonso had felt it, Vettel had been consumed by it, and even Leclerc, the current darling of Maranello, had quietly complained about favoritism and opaque decision-making. Hamilton, who studied every chapter of Ferrari's recent history before signing, knew precisely what he was entering. He wasn't naive, he was prepared. He had built safeguards, legal and psychological, around himself, because he understood that at Ferrari, survival wasn't guaranteed by talent alone. It required protection. The fallout was immediate and ferocious. The Ferrari garage, once united by the shared pursuit of victory, split into factions almost overnight. On one side stood Leclerc's loyalists, mechanics and strategists who saw Hamilton's clause as an act of betrayal, an insult to the team's honor. To them, his decision to expose the clause to the media was nothing short of a declaration of internal distrust. They viewed it as proof that Hamilton had never truly believed in the project, that his heart remained elsewhere, perhaps still beating in silver and turquoise rather than red. On the other side stood the veterans, the grizzled engineers and technicians who had weathered years of Maranello's internal storms. They privately admitted that Hamilton's caution was justified, even wise. They had seen too many champions chewed up by Ferrari's internal politics. To them, Hamilton's clause wasn't arrogance, it was self-preservation. Caught squarely in the center of this implosion was Frédéric Vasseur, the man tasked with steering Ferrari through one of its most delicate crises in decades. Publicly, he tried to project calm, dismissing the reports as standard contractual measures, and insisting that Hamilton remained committed to the team's long-term vision. But behind closed doors, the mood was far more volatile. Sources inside Maranello describe an emergency meeting held within 24 hours of Hamilton's comments, with Vasseur, Ferrari's legal counsel, and senior management scrambling to assess the scope of the damage. They needed to know how much legal exposure they faced, how fast Hamilton could activate his clause, and whether there was any way to block the exit if he chose to detonate it. The answer they received chilled the room. There was nothing they could do. If Hamilton presented credible evidence that met any of the 3 conditions, Ferrari was defenseless. The contract would dissolve immediately, and the team would be bound to pay the full buyout in one lump sum. The sponsors reacted next, swiftly and nervously. Multinational brands tied to Ferrari's image began making urgent inquiries, requesting internal audits and assurances that all technical data was being handled ethically. The fear of reputational damage was palpable. No global sponsor wanted to be linked to allegations of sabotage, favoritism, or deception. For companies that spend hundreds of millions for association with Ferrari's prestige, even the suggestion of dishonesty was toxic. Several sponsors reportedly demanded written transparency guarantees, with one threatening to suspend its activation campaign pending clarification of the Hamilton situation. Meanwhile, in Brackley, the mood was strikingly different. While Maranello spiraled into crisis management, Toto Wolff was said to be uncharacteristically relaxed, even amused. Austrian media described him as quietly pleased, noting that he had maintained continuous, friendly communication with Hamilton's management ever since the Ferrari deal had been announced. He had never burned the bridge, he had reinforced it. Some sources close to Mercedes hinted that a simulator seat, bearing Hamilton's initials, had been kept ready, unused, untouched, but always there. Just in case, one insider whispered. And that phrase, just in case, seems to encapsulate everything. Hamilton's move to Ferrari had always been about legacy, symbolism, and risk. But beneath the romance of red, there had always been a silver safety net, woven by the only man who truly understood him. Now, as Ferrari faces internal chaos, legal vulnerability, and a growing loss of credibility, Hamilton once again holds all the cards. Whether he chooses to pull the ejector handle or not, one thing has become unmistakably clear: this is no longer just a contract dispute. It's a masterclass in foresight, control, and leverage. If he walks, it will be on his terms, with his head high, his integrity intact, and a fleet of lawyers, fans, and sponsors ready to follow him wherever he lands. And if he walks back through the doors of Brackley, into the same silver fortress he once ruled, it won't be as a returning driver seeking redemption. It will be as a man who never truly left, a legend who outplayed the most political team in Formula One, safeguarded his destiny, and turned his greatest risk into his ultimate triumph. If Lewis Hamilton were to walk away from Ferrari by invoking the so-called sabotage clause, it wouldn't merely be a driver exit, it would erupt into one of the most seismic, reputation-shattering scandals the sport has ever witnessed. Formula One has seen controversies, internal betrayals, and contractual wars before, but nothing would compare to the magnitude of this. The moment such news broke, the entire motorsport world would descend into chaos. Every media outlet, every paddock insider, every former driver turned commentator would scramble to analyze, dissect, and speculate. Headlines would explode across every continent. The idea of Ferrari, the most iconic team in racing history, being accused of undermining the world's most famous and decorated driver would be nothing short of catastrophic. The Red Empire would find itself on fire, its legendary reputation scorched by the flames of global outrage and disbelief. For Ferrari's communications department, it would be an existential crisis. The PR fallout alone would be monstrous, sponsors panicking, stockholders demanding explanations, fans rioting on social media. Overnight, #Ferrari sabotage would dominate global trends, and journalists would flood Maranello seeking answers. Even Italian politicians, who often treat Ferrari as a national treasure, would be forced to respond. The mere accusation of internal foul play, let alone proven evidence, would devastate decades of brand integrity. For a team that built its identity on passion, precision, and pride, being accused of betraying the most celebrated driver alive would be a wound that could take generations to heal. And then there's Mercedes. For them, this would be the storybook ending no PR department could dream of scripting. Hamilton, humiliated and frustrated at Ferrari, returning to the team where he became legend. The team that always believed in him, that always gave him the machinery to win, the team that made him Lewis Hamilton, would be the ultimate redemption arc. It would be as if the universe itself had conspired to restore balance. The narrative would write itself, the fallen hero rising again, returning home to the silver chariot, to the man who had never lost faith, Toto Wolff. For Mercedes, it wouldn't just be about reclaiming their former champion, it would be about reclaiming their soul. It would be a thunderous statement to the world, that loyalty, trust, and belief still mean something in a sport built on politics and power. Meanwhile, within the scarlet walls of Maranello, tension has already reached suffocating levels. The atmosphere in the factory, once filled with pride and ambition, has curdled into silence, suspicion, and whispered blame. Engineers move carefully, conversations are brief, and every look carries unease. Departments that once collaborated seamlessly now operate like isolated islands. According to insiders, Leclerc has been visibly unsettled by the situation, even humiliated. He has confided to close friends that Hamilton has turned the team into a courtroom, a remark that perfectly captures the climate of paranoia and fear now gripping Ferrari. Team meetings, once energetic and collaborative, are now described as painfully tense. Every discussion about race strategy or setup direction feels shadowed by unspoken accusations. Hamilton's side of the garage reportedly operates with military-like discipline, while Leclerc's camp feels defensive, cornered, and frustrated. The two worlds, one coldly strategic, one emotionally wounded, exist mere meters apart, yet could not feel more distant. Even senior figures within Ferrari, once united under the belief that bringing Hamilton would restore their glory, now find themselves questioning whether the dream has turned into a political nightmare. Hamilton, for his part, remains outwardly calm, perhaps too calm. He carries himself with a level of composure that unnerves those around him. His body language in the paddock tells a story more powerful than any interview could. He walks with his usual elegance but without attachment, distant, calculating, detached from the chaos swirling around him. His tone with engineers is polite, professional, but measured. There's no visible anger, no open confrontation, just a quiet certainty that gives everyone the same impression. He already knows how this will end. While the team scrambles for explanations, Hamilton appears to be playing a different game entirely. He's not fighting for survival, he's preparing his checkmate. What makes this entire situation even more explosive is the movement happening behind closed doors, away from cameras and microphones. Hamilton's legal team, one of the most experienced and aggressive in the sport, has reportedly been placed on standby, ready to act at a moment's notice. According to sources close to his camp, they've been instructed to respond immediately if the auditors currently reviewing the Singapore Grand Prix data find any irregularities. That race, now infamous inside Ferrari's headquarters, has become the epicenter of suspicion. A handful of technical anomalies detected in telemetry logs have already raised eyebrows. Differences between live fuel flow data, inconsistent battery deployment patterns, and subtle variations in tire pressure readings that don't align with standard strategy. If the auditors uncover even a hint of manipulation, even the smallest piece of evidence suggesting interference with Hamilton's car performance, the consequences will be catastrophic. Ferrari's nightmare won't just be losing their star driver, it will be legal, financial, and moral collapse all at once. The sabotage clause in Hamilton's contract is brutal in its wording and devastating in its implications. It doesn't simply allow him to walk away freely. It compels Ferrari to pay him his full buyout value, reportedly more than $45 million, within 30 days. And that's before additional penalties for breach of integrity are applied. In other words, Ferrari wouldn't just lose Hamilton. They would lose tens of millions, their credibility, and their global standing, in one crushing, irrevocable blow. And Hamilton's camp knows it. They've prepared meticulously. The clause was inserted into his Ferrari contract precisely because of his experiences elsewhere, a protective shield against internal betrayal. It ensures that if he senses sabotage, or if evidence emerges that the team deliberately compromised his race results, he can legally dismantle the agreement and walk away untarnished. For a man of Hamilton's stature, this is not just a safety net, it's a weapon. Inside Maranello, rumors swirl that certain members of the technical department have already been questioned by internal compliance officers. Some reports suggest that encrypted communications between two engineers on race day have been flagged for further review. Ferrari has, of course, denied all wrongdoing, but denial means little when whispers grow into full-blown speculation. Every passing day without a clear resolution deepens the cracks in the Scuderia's image. The once proud team that symbolized passion and unity now looks fractured, vulnerable, and afraid. Meanwhile, Wolff and Mercedes watch from the sidelines with quiet patience. The Austrian knows that sometimes, revenge doesn't need to be planned, it arrives on its own. For Mercedes, Hamilton's return would not only be poetic justice, it would reignite an era. The prospect of seeing the Silver Arrows and Hamilton reunited under the same banner again would electrify fans across the globe. For every supporter who had mourned his departure, it would be the ultimate redemption story, a comeback not just for a driver, but for everything he represents: perseverance, defiance, and destiny. Ferrari, on the other hand, would find itself trapped in a storm of its own making. The scandal would hang over Maranello like a curse, the ultimate irony for a team that thought signing Hamilton would bring them glory, not ruin. They wanted a savior. They might end up with their greatest downfall. And somewhere deep inside the paddock, as cameras flash and speculation mounts, Hamilton walks with quiet purpose. He doesn't need to raise his voice or make threats. He knows the truth will surface on its own. While others panic, he remains serene. Because in his mind, the board is already set, the pieces are already moving, and the final move is his to make. The timing for Ferrari could not possibly be more catastrophic. The chaos has arrived at the worst conceivable moment, right as the team prepares to head into the high-pressure cauldron of Austin, a circuit that now feels less like a racetrack and more like a battlefield where the entire world will be watching every breath, every movement, every split-second decision. It's not just another Grand Prix anymore, it's ground zero for one of the most volatile public implosions the sport has seen in decades. Inside Maranello, the walls feel like they're closing in. Every pit strategy, every line of telemetry, every radio message between Hamilton and his engineers will be dissected frame by analysts, fans, and rivals alike. The atmosphere is suffocating. The Ferrari pit wall, once seen as the beating heart of Italian precision, is now consumed by fear and self-doubt. Strategists are terrified of making a wrong call, knowing that one misstep could ignite an inferno that might burn the entire team down. If Hamilton senses even the faintest trace of bias, if there's even the slightest hint that Leclerc is being favored or that his side of the garage is being undermined, everyone knows what will happen. The paddock will explode. The cameras will be on him at all times, capturing every glare, every sigh, every frustrated hand gesture. The tension is so thick it could be sliced with a knife. The Italian media, relentless and merciless, is already circling like vultures over a carcass. Every headline screams betrayal, chaos, or collapse. Editorials in La Gazzetta dello Sport and Corriere dello Sport are accusing Ferrari of losing control, of mishandling internal dynamics, of allowing the world's most high-profile driver to become an adversary instead of an asset. Television commentators speak of La Tempesta Rossa, the red storm, that could tear Ferrari apart from the inside. Behind the scenes, Ferrari's communications team is in full-blown crisis mode. Press officers are working through the night, drafting and redrafting statements, trying to soften the narrative, trying to maintain some illusion of unity while internally, everything is fracturing. They know that one wrong word, one leaked quote, one misinterpreted phrase from either Leclerc or Hamilton could ignite a PR wildfire impossible to contain. Inside the paddock, rival team principals are quietly watching the situation unfold with a mix of fascination and schadenfreude. None more so than Toto Wolff, who, as always, remains calm in the shadows, patient, calculating, and utterly precise. For Wolff, this isn't chaos. It's opportunity. Every sign of weakness from Ferrari is a signal for him to move a piece on the chessboard. Insiders close to the Mercedes camp claim that his message to Hamilton following the revelation of that now infamous contract clause, the one that allows Hamilton to trigger an exit under conditions of organizational dishonesty, was deliberately simple, strategic brilliance. But those two words weren't just praise. They were bait. They were an open door. They were an invitation to come home. Wolff knows that if Ferrari collapses under the weight of its own politics, and all the signs point that way, Hamilton's path back to Mercedes will be perfectly clear. No contractual delays, no legal entanglements, no messy negotiations. The clause was designed with surgical precision to give Hamilton total control of his destiny. For perhaps the first time in Formula One history, a driver doesn't just drive for a team, he owns the power dynamic. He holds the detonator in one hand and the steering wheel in the other. In Brackley, preparations have quietly begun. People close to the Mercedes factory speak of whispers, coded emails, and subtle shifts in the internal workflow. Engineers who once worked with Hamilton are reportedly clearing old data archives, revisiting simulator configurations that match his preferences, and preparing the infrastructure for what many now see as inevitable, the return of the prodigal champion. Wolff himself has been unusually quiet publicly, but those who know him best say his silence speaks volumes. He's waiting, watching, ready to move the second Ferrari's internal chaos spills over. The timing could not be more exquisite. Mercedes' long-term lineup remains uncertain. Kimi Antonelli, the young prodigy from the junior ranks, is still untested at the highest level, his future potential enormous but unproven. George Russell, meanwhile, is under mounting pressure to deliver consistency and leadership, something that has occasionally slipped through his fingers under the weight of expectation. If Hamilton becomes available, Wolff knows exactly what to do. The return would be poetic, powerful, and perfectly timed. There would be no contractual barriers, no gardening leave, no politics, just a clean homecoming to the team that built its dynasty around him. The implications of this saga stretch far beyond just two teams. What's unfolding is a seismic shift in how Formula One operates at its very core. This isn't merely a contractual drama, it's a revolution in driver power. For decades, Teams have dictated terms, controlled narratives, and enforced loyalty through the weight of money and machinery. But Hamilton's clause has rewritten that balance. For the first time, a driver has effectively institutionalized accountability within a Formula One contract, a legal mechanism that allows him to fine his own employer if they fail to uphold integrity. It's unprecedented. It changes everything. The ripple effects are already spreading. Managers from rival teams are quietly reviewing their own drivers' contracts, re-examining clauses, and rethinking what autonomy means in the modern era of Formula One. One executive from Red Bull, speaking anonymously, admitted that Hamilton's deal has changed the power structure of the sport forever. It's no longer just about performance, it's about principles. The idea that a driver, even one as decorated as Hamilton, could wield such legal and moral authority over a powerhouse like Ferrari has shaken the paddock to its core. As the sport barrels toward Austin, the tension is unbearable. The air feels charged with equal parts anticipation and dread. Inside Ferrari, the team is fracturing from every direction. Vasseur is reportedly holding crisis meetings that stretch late into the night, trying to prevent a full collapse of morale. Leclerc is said to be quietly seething, venting to close friends about being trapped in the middle of a political storm he never created. The engineers are exhausted, the staff divided, and the leadership paralyzed by fear of what's coming. And standing in the eye of that hurricane is Lewis Hamilton, calm, collected, and utterly unbreakable. He doesn't need to raise his voice or make threats. His very presence has turned the world's most iconic team into a prisoner of its own politics. Ferrari, once the master of narrative, now dances to his rhythm. Every decision revolves around him. Every move is made with the fear of triggering the clause that could end everything. And somewhere, deep inside Maranello, auditors are digging through documents, reviewing internal communications, and examining transactions that could determine the fate of the Scuderia's most controversial era. If those auditors uncover even a fraction of what some insiders suspect, evidence of mismanagement, lack of transparency, or internal sabotage, the fallout will be nuclear. What's coming could be the most explosive, expensive, and consequential team driver split in the history of Formula One. Not just a breakup, but a full-blown corporate war that might reshape the entire grid leading into 2026 and beyond. The contracts, the sponsorships, the internal politics, everything could be rewritten in the wake of this. Formula One, already a theater of power and ego, is about to witness a new kind of drama, one that transcends racing itself. And in the heart of Brackley, under the soft hum of the wind tunnel and the glow of the simulator lights, Toto Wolff is waiting. Calm, patient, certain. The silver seat that once belonged to the greatest driver of this generation remains empty, but not for long. Tools are being polished. Engineers are preparing. And somewhere, deep in the corridors of Mercedes, a quiet anticipation builds. Because everyone there knows one thing: when the storm in Maranello finally consumes itself, the king will come home, and the silver arrows will rise again.